This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we're very fortunate tonight to have as our guest one of my favorite guys in state politics, really my cousin, and one of the great state senators, Senator Will Barfoot from Pike Road, a staunch Republican and a good conservative and a good man and a good father, a good politician, and they love him and all over his district. And Will, good to have you on the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Steve.
He's born and raised in Pike Road, y'all. Some of y'all think that Pike Road's full of all new people that just fled Montgomery and moved out there in the country and live in an upscale neighborhood. It's not even an organized city, but he was born and raised right there. That's how we kin to each other. My mama's people are from North Pike County, and if you look at a map, North Pike County and South Montgomery are really the same area. So I saw years ago, I had a Barfoot in my family, my Grant family, and I saw his Uncle Joel one time, and he says, Flowers, we kin. He knew about it. Yeah. We talk about it every time. Well, Will finished up he's in his 6th year in the state senate, was elected first, this is 24 in 2018. But your district, tell our folks again your district. It's all of Pike Road and Wind Lakes and all that area of Montgomery, then tell them the rest of it.
Yeah, so Crenshaw County, it's all of Crenshaw County, about 3/4 of Montgomery County, which is all of South Montgomery County, and then extends into the city limits of Montgomery, down the Atlanta Highway a portion, and then about 3/4 the area of Elmore County too, so pretty big district.
None of Autauga, though.
None of Autauga. That's Senator Chambliss that has Autauga.
But now he gets part of Elmore, doesn't he?
He does. We share Elmore County, and he takes in the balance of what I don't have up there.
Now, you're now chairman of the judiciary. You're a practicing attorney here in Montgomery, have been for years, and got a private law practice. So you're chairman of the judiciary, which is a normal ascension for, but it's a very powerful position in state government.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the opportunity to serve on that committee, and then as a vice chair, and then now in the past 2 years, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We probably have as many bills come through there as any other committee, just it's a pleasure to work with other lawyers, and even those that aren't lawyers on there. We touch a variety and a large range of different topics, from criminal to civil matters. All kinds of issues that come up, and we're fairly deliberative in that committee too. We handle some pretty tough legislation.
How many folks are on judiciary?
There's 13 of us.
Is that the way every committee is?
No, different committees, different numbers on there. I think judiciary probably has as many as any of the other ones. Some of them have 11, maybe as few as 9. In the Senate, there are 35 senators, and at one point in time, last quadrennium, I think I was on 6 or maybe 7 different committees, and it's hard to keep up with everything that's going on when you're on that many committees, as opposed in the House when there's 105 House members and there may be on 2 or maybe 3 committees. So.
Well, now, is the makeup partisan-wise, folks, Alabama State Senate is a very powerful body. It only has 35 members, and each 35 members represents 150,000 people approximately.
That's right.
So there are a lot of people in the Senate district, and I've told Senator Barfoot this and Senator Hatcher here in Montgomery over the years that both of them are good friends of mine, that if I was a state senator from Montgomery, I think you're more powerful and have a lot more influence over public policy as one of 35 state senators and not having to go to Washington every week than being one of 435 members of Congress. Yeah. And I think you thought about that when that seat came open, that congressional seat. I'm sure people came to you about it.
They did, had some good conversations about it, and quite honestly, it just wasn't the right time or wasn't something I felt driven to do at that time. Still got out of 5 children, I've still got the youngest at home.
That's what I thought.
And you have to. I don't want to not be around for him. And then the other thing is quite honestly, I enjoy the practice of law. Our law firm, Barfoot and Schottaker, primarily handles civil litigation type cases, injury and death cases, and I didn't want to give that up to go to Washington.
You got a great life getting to have your law practice, your family, and being in the state senate. You be in your own bed every night.
Yep, that's right.
I mean, you ain't got to drive, stay in a hotel from Huntsville or Mobile. It's the greatest job, be a state senator from Montgomery.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the opportunity. There are days, honestly, that I think, what am I doing? What have I done? But the days that you know you've had a positive impact on legislation, made changes, either stopped bad bills or made good bills better, that's rewarding.
Where I was going with the Senate membership, only 35, we have a super Republican majority in our legislature. I think I'm right on the numbers. There are 27 Republicans, only 8 Democrats.
That's correct, yep.
So the Democrats are quite an disadvantage. How do y'all make up the committee? Do you give the Democrats a certain number of seats? How do y'all do that?
Generally, it's fairly proportionate, although judiciary is a much closer number, not proportionate to the overall Senate. But leadership in the Senate determines that. Of course, as you know, every 4 years, the new quadrennium about who's going to be on the committees and the makeup of those committees.
Who was chairman of judiciary before you?
Senator Watley was before
right.
me, and then before that.
He was a non-lawyer, wasn't he?
No,
Oh,
he's a lawyer.
okay.
He's a lawyer. And then before that would have been Senator Cam Ward, who's now, as you know, pardons and paroles, so
Yeah.
director.
You know, I'm so old, I
lawyers.
remember when Cam Ward was president of student government at Troy University. I
Well,
was in the legislature.
now you're going to telling your age, huh?
He came. I remember Jack Hawkins recruiting him to come to school. He was a high school politico out of Alabaster, and he came to Troy and soon became president of SGA. And he'd buddy around me. He'd come to the Capitol with me, and then he was close to old Jabbo. They traveled together.
Well, let me tell you, anybody up there in the Senate, if they've been there long enough, certainly wants to be close to Jabbo. I mess with him sometimes during caucus meetings. We always sit next to each other, and it probably just happened that way. And like a good Baptist, you got to assign seats, even though they're not assigned. But I tell him, I said, Jabbo, I see the rest of these people out here, see who you're sitting next to.
That reminds me when I was good friends with Senator Shelby, and one year he asked me to, as a real flattered thing, to join him for the State of the Union address. When Trump was first inaugurated, Trump's first State of the Union, they only have 2 guests, and his wife Annette could not go, so he asked me to go with him, and I went with him. But they have a dinner before the State of the Union downstairs in the Senate cafeteria dining room, where the Senate Republicans met, and it was like a member of the school when the most popular kid in the school, everybody wanted to sit at his table, and I came with Shelby, and we were sitting there, and every one of those senators, Lindsey Graham, and all of them wanted to come sit at Shelby's table because he was the king of the Senate, the chairman of appropriations, and been there for 40 years or 30 years. And
wanted to see him and be seen with him.
If you go to dinner with Shelby at a Washington restaurant, you won't believe the difference of those lobbyists. I mean, the lobbyists in Washington would hear he had a reservation at a certain restaurant, and they would get a table at that restaurant next to them so they could build the company. They were at the restaurant with Senator Shelby.
The things that go on in Washington. There's another reason that I didn't.
They probably do that in Montgomery.
Well,
with you, they probably say or some of the lobbyists say I'm having dinner with Senator Barfoot, and they're going to what's that new Italian restaurant downtown?
Ravello.
Yeah.
I get to go home and eat my wife's cooking most of the time, so
well, good.
They don't show up there.
They probably do that. Say, and some lobbyists for the forest stuff, they get a table next to you. Say, I was with Senator Barfoot tonight. They build their clients for it. The ones who make money up here are the lobbyists.
Yeah, they as a lawyer, sometimes lawyers get a bad name or bad reputation. We take kind of the brunt of the jokes. Lobbyists, same thing, but I see there's not a whole lot of difference in actually lobbying and lawyering because you're advocating for a position.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's funny, the old joke about how, folks want to throw out the folks that in Washington, D.C., except for their man
right.
in Washington or woman in Washington, D.C.
If they polled your district right now, and I think I've written this, and I saw it when I was in the legislature, if you polled your district and said, what do you think about the Alabama legislature? It'd be 25% favorable and 75% negative. Well, they said, they're all crooks. I hate every one of them. They're the sorriest thing that ever lived. And then they said, what do you think about Senator Barfoot? Oh, he's good. You'd have 75% approval. Every one of them a crook with their own.
There was a story about Big Jim that I probably won't tell on the air, but I'd heard the story, and about the man that came in and Governor Folsom said, his assistant said, well, you know, Governor, he's a so-and-so, and Governor Folsom said, I know, but he's our so-and-so. And probably a lot of truth to that.
It was. Old Big Jim was a colorful guy. Yeah. I had somebody reading my book the other day, was talking about that story about Big Jim. And in the ranking fight was the guy who brought his preacher down here. Had prison camps all over the state back there. Every county had a prison camp. Yeah. And so he was trying to get his preacher, and it was the ranking fight was telling him, says, he's the best preacher you ever saw. And he said he can save 500 souls. He ought to see him preach a funeral. He's the next Billy Graham. Big Jim said, I don't want to hear that. He said, my kind of guy is a Big Jim man. I don't care how many souls he won. Yeah. But let's talk about the session some, Will. Yeah. It was a doggone busy session.
Oh, it was.
I mean, y'all got thrown a lot of doggone stuff. I mean, not even knowing the IVF stuff was going to come. Talk about some of the issues that came up during the session that made it. The budget's always tough.
Budgets are always tough, and as you know, that's the reason we're there is to pass budgets. All the others is ancillary. Other stuff is ancillary. So we had the DEI Divisive Concepts Bill that I was fortunate enough to be able to carry. We passed that, and you've seen that at a national level, and we finally got that accomplished here to do away with the DEI offices and some of the programs, kind of the woke agendas have been called. In secondary education. That's a big issue. Second one, and I want you to think about the size of these, how heavy these lifts are to accomplish, is we put a cap on property tax of 7%. So going forward, the property tax, when the revenue,
that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
That went on the radar screen.
It did. Most people don't know.
Elaborate on that some, Will. Who sponsored that?
It was a House bill. Senator Sessions had it in the Senate, but we wound up passing the House bill because it had to have actually started in the House. Because
nobody talks about that.
7% cap. Some jurisdictions had as many as 40, 50% increase year over year in property taxes. And we put a cap on that tax where it could go up to 7%. I think it's a good piece of legislation. There's a sunset provision on there, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's a 3-year sunset. So we'll have to review that again. But it caps the rate of which those property tax increases can be at 7%, unless the property's sold or otherwise modified. You make $100,000 addition to your house, your property tax is going to go up. If you sold your house for $1 million, the next person is going to come in, they're going to pay property tax on that million. But capping property tax was a huge issue. Then you also had the school choice, the Choose Act. The governor championed that, and of course,
that's right.
Started in the Senate a couple of years ago.
Big thing for Montgomery.
Huge deal. And in essence, what it does is the state portion of the taxes that you pay, about $7,000 now. Those families who have children in elementary, junior high, and high schools can take that $7,000 and apply that to a private school, have the opportunity to take that money and transfer to another school district using that portion of that money if that school district allows them to. So it's a parental choice in education, which again, you think about going back prior to 2010 when the legislature changed from Democrat control to Republicans, nobody would have ever thought that would have happened. You had a ballot harvesting bill that Senator Gudger had, made national headlines, and hopefully cut down on some of
you and Garland still pretty good friends?
We are. He's
y'all not sweet mates anymore, though, are you?
No, we're not. I've got a different office now, but he's my buddy, and he's in my freshman class, and we've.
I love that class.
Yeah, we were.
I bonded with y'all. You and Gudger and Dan Roberts, and who else in that?
Sam Gavan.
Yeah.
Chris Elliott. Andrew Jones and Randy Price.
I like Andrew Jones.
Yeah. Then you had 3 House members that moved up with us at the same time. That's Senator Jack Williams, Senator David Sessions, and Senator Donnie.
Williams was in the House. How long was he in the House, you think?
I don't know. But Chastain and Williams and Sessions were all in the House.
All came in the House, yeah.
So that would have been, that's 10 that came up in that one cycle.
That's a pretty big class.
Very big class.
That's third turnover.
That's right.
So you had the DEI, the property tax cap. That was big, and then the school choice was big, especially for Montgomery. And what were we on about? You were talking about the next bill that was
ballot harvesting that Garland Gudger
did. Okay, that's right.
Provisions. There were certain. I think out of 67 counties, there were 2 or 3 that had as many as in the 30 percentile, I believe, that were absentee ballots, as opposed to the rest of the state that was. single digits in absentee ballots. And so the allegations, at least, or the look is that maybe, there was something particular going on in those regions that shouldn't have been. So we put a stop to that.
Well, it really was bad in Georgia. I think the Georgia legislature cut that. That's going to make a difference in the presidential race.
I think so.
I think the Republicans carry Georgia this next time.
Let's hope so.
I think that's what's going to happen. But now let me ask you this. Also, y'all got thrown. Let me back up the school choice a minute. I had a state representative from Tuscaloosa named Cynthia Allman on the show during the session. We were talking about the two big issues at that time, which were school choice and the gambling issue, which percolated the entire session to allow people to vote on the lottery. And her district is mostly Tuscaloosa County. It'd be similar to yours in that in your Pike Road people, the majority of those Pike Road people would go to that public school in Pike Road. That's the reason they moved from Montgomery, a lot of them. So they got a lot invested in their public school. And also, your Elmore County and Crenshaw people do, especially Elmore, have a really, and she had that thing. She told me that voting for the school choice was tougher than voting to let people vote on the lottery.
Not for me.
It wasn't that hard. It was not tough.
No, and here's the reason I say that is because I think that if you have a good school system, or at least if parents of children in that school system believe it's a good school system, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to stay right where they're at, right?
Right.
And so I don't think that upsets the apple cart. There were folks around the state who probably, like Representative Allman, were torn as to what negative effects it could have on their school district. And I made the case, if you've got a good school system, your kids aren't going to go anywhere. They're not going to take that money. The parents aren't going to take that money and send them to a private school. They're not going to take that money and homeschool them. They're going to stay right where they're at.
The only thing I see about it, though, if I was a representative from, say, a Sand Mountain school system, Albertville or Morgan, Decatur, or more specifically, if you had a Vestavia or Homewood or a Mountain Brook in your district, basically what you're doing is you're taking public funds from your well-run school system, well-financed school system, and I don't want to pick on Montgomery, but you're letting people in Montgomery get a tax break when none of your people go to private schools.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but that made it a little bit easier for me because in Elmore County and Pike Road and Crenshaw County, again,
it was easy to vote for you. But you can see how if you represent Vestavia or Decatur or Huntsville, did that come up during the discussion? Did most of the Republicans vote for it, though?
Yeah, I think it was pretty overwhelming. It was a Republican platform kind of a thing, parental choice, and it's not just from the academic side of the equation either. You think about what some of the, again, I go back to a term that's used nationally, but woke ideas and things that are being taught potentially in school. And if you're a parent with a child that's in a school that you can't afford to move, right? Your job won't let you. You just can't afford to move into another place outside that school district. But you've got a child that's going to this school system who's being taught some things that you just don't agree with, right? Not necessarily from just an academic standpoint, but from a social standpoint. Now you've got the ability to get your child out of that position.
Well, now then the IVF thing came too. Yeah. What did y'all do about that?
Well,
did you see that coming out of the Supreme Court? That was a weird decision.
Well, it was difficult, but as I understand that case, number one, without going into too great a detail, there was an individual who was in a facility in that hospital that should not have been let out of that area of the hospital, and gotten into an area where the IVF, where the cryogenics were, and nobody should have been.
In that case, they were doing it, so it wasn't just against IVF.
That's correct.
Okay, well, I'm glad I didn't know about that.
And that individual who might have had some mental disabilities got into an area and destroyed a bunch of embryos.
Oh, I see.
And
so it was really that case. Nobody talked about that. That was the reason. They just saw out of the blue. They just declared.
Oh,
so that's
Supreme Court came out and said, hey, this is under Alabama's wrongful death statute, which is a civil remedy. These embryos are considered, and I think correctly ruled in the correct fashion, according to Alabama law. They weren't activists, they were following the law, which is what we want them to do. And in response to that, some of the IVF clinics says, well, if that's the law in Alabama, now we're going to shut down. The unfortunate part about that is there are families who need IVF services and desperately have gone through that and tried to create a family. The unfortunate part of that is that some of the businesses related to IVF saw that as an opportunity for complete and total immunity. There were companies from out of state that came in and said, hey, if we're going to give immunity to these clinics, we want immunity for the products that we sell to those clinics. There were instances of national corporations that had been sued class action wise and wanted to, have this crisis to give them immunity. Very unfortunate.
Now let's talk some. The lottery thing and gaming thing was on the table the entire session, and I think you voted with the majority of your constituents. I think most Alabamians, if I'm not right, 80% of what I've seen of polling, Republican and Democrats, just want the right to vote on the lottery and some form of gambling. I think most of them would vote for sports betting, the full thing. You voted with the majority, and the reason, and most legislators did, the average person does not realize that entire package passed the House 72 to 29, and it passed in the Senate 20 to 15. You were one of 20 in the majority that voted for it, but you've got to have a 3/5 vote, a constitutional amendment, and so it needed 21, just one more vote in the Senate. It needed 63 in the House. It got it. I can tell you this from talking to civic clubs around the state. The last 5 years, and these are Rotary clubs usually, which are made up of Republicans. I can be talking about some subject that has nothing to do with lottery or anything, but the first question posed to me, Flowers, why in the world can't we vote on a lottery? I know you've heard that a million times.
Yes, I have.
So I mean, you will vote with your people. I mean, you probably never will buy a lottery ticket.
Well, I might. I do if I go to another state. I'll stop if I get gas and buy one. But so I'm not the advocate for gambling. I think sometimes it certainly lends itself to be poor public policy. I think there's some social ills to it. But I'm also not so much against it that I will not vote for a bill that gives the people a right to vote if I think that legislation is palatable enough. And what do I mean by that? In 2021, I was on record to say I am going to vote against this bill if these changes aren't made. We delayed it a couple of weeks, made those changes, and then I voted for it. So you're right, the House passed a version, it came to us in the Senate, and we actually passed a Senate version of that, which is different than the House. It went back to conference committee. Our version was much different than I think the House's version was, and conference committee came out and went back to the House, and then subsequent vote in the Senate, which, as you said, failed 20 to 15. You're right, though, it makes it difficult because you got to have a 3/5 vote, so you need 21 votes in the Senate, and 3/5 of 105 is about 63 if my quick math is right in the House. There are those who will never vote for any type of gambling. There are those who only vote for certain types of gambling, and then there are those who will vote for any kind, but then the rub becomes, where does the money go? What are we going to use it to who are we going to use it to benefit? So
most people say that they like the education aspect of the lottery. I think that's where it came down, is the lottery would go to education.
That's correct.
But like the Georgia Hope Scholarship. The thing that I've gotten over the years, Will, is that, and I think I would fit right in this category. I just never had an interest in gambling. I've never bought a lottery ticket. I've never bet on a football game. I don't know how to do it. But I'm going to tell you what, if they put it on the ballot, I'll be the first one to vote for it, because I got enough sense to know that every state around us, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi, have a lottery, and the biggest lottery sales are on our border. We've probably educated thousands of Georgia students with Alabama dollars to go to college free. It's just almost like asinine not to take that money, because people are buying lottery tickets.
But what's interesting about it is that the House version and the Senate version, quite honestly, although the Senate version was a little bit closer to status quo, included a either parimutuel type wagering, casino style games, or the House version had, sports betting from your phone. So it's not just a lottery. And I think, so then the question becomes, well, why not pass just a lottery? And I think it's also difficult to pass just a lottery because there are those senators and House members around the state that said,
Let's get all the money.
let's get all of it.
Uh-huh.
Or I'm protecting the people that at whether it be the dog tracks or whatever else, that are my constituents that live in the communities that I represent, that want there to be something more here. So I'm not going to vote for X if I can get X and Y.
Well, do you foresee? First of all, I don't think Governor Ivey has the stomach to put up with it anymore. I don't think she calls a special session. So I think it's moot to ask you the question, do you think a special session would be fruitless? I'll admit you answer that, but the second thing is, do you think Ledbetter comes with it? Because he really was the impetus behind it last year.
Yeah.
I don't think Governor Ivey knew he had the votes like he did in the House.
Well, certainly the Speaker, Ledbetter, I mean, there was a big turnout in the House for that. I think a different style, not being in the House, but it seems to me a different style of leadership. Not that one's any better than the other from the previous Speaker, Mac McCutcheon, and I think the Speaker is well liked and revered, seems to me, from the House members down there. To your question about whether or not there'll be a special, I don't know the answer to that, but I would say, in my opinion, it's not wise to call a special session unless you know you got the votes there, and there's been no discussions about that. So I would be a little surprised if there's a special session called on that topic.
I don't think she has the interest, or the interest, or maybe stamina to really get in there and push it like she did the road thing. I mean, she really pushed that road thing.
Yeah, that was
5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, that was the first session. I think the first week of my first session, I didn't know what where my car was parked or where the bathrooms were.
You know, people don't realize that, but it is wise to send people back numerous times to the legislature because they know about these things.
There's a lot of truth to that. I'm the guy who said I was for term limits, and I still generally probably am to some degree. But I will say this: there is benefits from having somebody there who has been there and knows the ins and the outs and how to accomplish things and what you need, the bad legislation that you need to stop. And the longer you're there, the better you can do that. That's for sure.
Well, Senator Barfoot, our time is up. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule because you got to make a living practicing law besides talking about politics all the time. But we appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Thank you, Steve.
And we thank our viewers for watching. Hope y'all tune in again next week for Alabama Politics. Thank you, Senator Barfoot.
Thank you.